Good evening, everyone. This is the Health, Seniors, Human Services, Youth Education, Human Rights Committee meeting. This is the December meeting. My name is May and I am the chair. So we're going to start the meeting. Before we start though, we will have attendance, a roll call. All right.
I'm going to say that on nine. Bailey,
Oh, here.
Larry Flynn, Eric Diaz,
President.
Romaine,
Robbie.
Robbie, thank you. Robbie,
From your.
thank you. Okay, sorry, I should have been hooked on phonics, I was not. Okay. Anna Picard. Grabbing over Alvarez. And Johnny here, thank you. Arnett Scott, here. Carmen Perez. Tanisha Fields. Yeah, that was it.
All right, so I sent out the minutes by email. And are there any changes to the minutes? Okay, so if not, then they are approved. Okay, so we will start the meeting. The first agenda item is from, the first agenda is from the New York County Defender Services. Here. No, I work for Hamilton Madison.
There may be on the Zoom. Is it, yeah, here, let me, there's raising her hand, let me promote to panelist.
Hey, question. There was just like, yes, visitors. Is there a public session?
Hi.
Okay, wait, okay,
A co-presenter. Okay, hold on.
You may do the co-host, so if you have slides or anything you want to share, you can screen share.
Okay, hold on. I'm just promoting my co-presenter, Rebecca, who is now, okay, great. So now we will share our screen and we'll start our presentation.
Yes, okay. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. Just give me a moment.
Okay, before you start, could you just introduce yourselves and your name, your title?
Sure. Yeah. While Rebecca's getting it up and running, I can introduce myself. I'm Casey Del Porto. I am a supervising attorney of the Policy and Community Engagement Unit at New York County Defender Services. NYCDS is a public defender office that represents people who are charged with crimes in Manhattan. So exclusively people who've been arrested and charged with a crime in Manhattan. So we represent people from all over the city because, not everyone who gets arrested in Manhattan is necessarily lives here, but there is a concentration of people. Many of our clients come specifically from this neighborhood, from CV3's jurisdiction, Lower East Side and Chinatown especially. So.
Yes, and my name is Rebecca Cortez. I'm one of the community engagement interns at NYCDS. I've been at NYCDS since last spring now, and I'm going to be starting the presentation tonight. I just sent a request to share my screen. It says the feature is disabled.
Oh, I can do it. Hold on a second.
Yeah, I'm just.
Here, I'll just share. Do you guys see?
They can try it, there you go. We can try it now.
Oh, she's on.
I'm gonna try to do it, but hold on. Let me see if I.
No, you could try it again.
Okay. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
No, there you go.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry, guys. Yeah, okay, Rebecca, take it away.
Hi again, everyone. Once again, my name's Rebecca Cortez. Thank you so much to CB3 for hosting us today. We're very excited to be here. So we're here to present on the Treatment Court Expansion Act, which is a statewide initiative led by the Treatment Not Jail Coalition. Ultimately, this bill would expand and modernize New York's network of treatment courts, which would reduce our reliance on prisons and jails, while also addressing the growing and broader issue of the mental health crisis across New York State. So our goal today is for you all to leave here with a stronger sense of what treatment courts are, what our bill aims to do, and also how you can get involved in our campaign. All right, so the root of the issue, like I mentioned, and what we seek to address is the mental health crisis. Providing treatment for mental health issues ultimately reduces recidivism, and it also enhances public safety. But here are some facts first to just contextualize the current landscape of the mental health crisis. So as you can see, 1 in 5 New Yorkers suffers from a mental health diagnosis, and over half of the New York City jail population also has a mental health diagnosis, and the proportion of those who have a serious mental health illness has skyrocketed in recent years, from 10% in 2017 to 21% now. New York's jails and prisons are some of the largest psychiatric facilities in the country, and Rikers Island houses more people with mental illness than any psychiatric hospital in the United States. Additionally, less than 20% of those incarcerated receive mental health services. And one example of limited access to mental health services is this process called deadlocking, which came to light about a year ago at Rikers Island, which is New York City's largest jail facility. Deadlocking is essentially a form of solitary confinement. So it refers to being locked in a cell without the ability to leave for any reason, which is usually in a mental health unit, and it can last for weeks or months at a time. And it's also usually used as a disciplinary measure. It often involves denial of access to basic services such as showers, phone calls, medical care, and even mental health treatment. Thus, deadlocking is also very traumatizing, and it ultimately exacerbates the mental health issues that a lot of these individuals already have. This also goes against the minimum standards of keeping those in jail facilities safe, but it continues to this day, and it also often remains very undocumented. As I'm sure people are aware, there have been a skyrocket in deaths at Rikers Island as well. 13 people have died in New York City DOC custody this year. But as the Vera Institute reports, New York City Comptroller Brad Lander and a federal monitor assigned to oversee the DOC have speculated that there may be even more in custody deaths than the department has reported. And I also just want to end with the mental health care that people do receive is also substandard in nature. So it's no wonder that jail leads to increased rates of reoffending. People are left traumatized and decompensated, which results in further crimes. And now, in addition to public safety, incarceration is also incredibly expensive. So in New York City, it costs about $507,000 a year to keep just one person in jail. And at the state level, the number is still huge, around $115,000 per person each year in prison. And then when we compare these numbers to community-based options, we find that supportive housing costs only $25,000 to $50,000 per year, depending on the program. A Forensic Act team also costs about $8,800 in the first year, which drops to roughly $2,200 in following years. And for those who don't know, the Forensic Assertive Community Treatment, which is that acronym FACT, it ultimately supports individuals in the criminal justice system who are experiencing severe mental illness, often alongside substance abuse or physical health issues, by integrating mental health care with justice system services to address criminogenic risks, divert people from incarceration, reduce recidivism and hospitalization, lower costs, and ultimately improve public safety. So overall, from these numbers, you can see we're spending 10 times more, sometimes even 20 times more to incarcerate someone than to support them in the community. And that second and last fact is public safety. Research shows incarceration doesn't make people less likely to reoffend or to offend. On the contrary, people who are incarcerated are actually more likely to be rearrested after release. On the other hand, diversion, like the Treatment Court Expansion Act, can cut rearrest rates by about 50%. So diversion isn't just cheaper, it's also more effective for both individuals and the overall public safety of our communities. So I'm now going to turn the conversation to Casey, and she's going to discuss more of the specifics of our bill, the Treatment Court Expansion Act.
Thank you, Rebecca. So yes, this is our bill. It's called the Treatment Court Expansion Act. It's a state bill, so this is pending the state legislature. It is in the Senate, being sponsored by Senator Ramos, who's right here. And then in the Assembly, it's sponsored by Assemblymember Farah Soufront Forrest. So what we really seek to do at our core is to expand and modernize our state's network of treatment courts. What are treatment courts? They go by many different names. They're called sometimes specialty courts, problem-solving courts, drug courts, diversion courts, mental health courts. Ultimately, they are all the same concept. They seek to divert people from a jail and prison sentence, so from sort of like the traditional criminal legal process, and avoid a criminal conviction by allowing them to resolve their case by completing treatment to address the root causes. So rather than litigating a case and, you know, going through the discovery process and hearings and trial, instead, these courts set aside the person, have them evaluated by a clinical team, try to identify what the root cause is, if any, of their criminal legal system involvement, and if it can be treated, set up a treatment plan, and try treatment before we resort to jail and prison. This is not new. New York has been experimenting with these types of courts for decades. And in some ways, we were the pioneers in this movement across the country. In 2009, we passed this landmark reform called drug law reform, which created drug courts in every county in New York State. It was transformative. It completely changed the landscape of the criminal legal system. And it created infrastructure everywhere to build out and expand on these types of courts. But ultimately, 15, 16 years later, we see a lot of room for improvement on that statute. Eligibility is very limited because the statute was drawn in very limited terms. And there's really no options for people with mental health diagnoses, even if they have a co-occurring disorder. So to address this glaring void, over the last 15, 16 years, many counties, many courts have taken it upon themselves to try to create their own analogous parallel track for people with mental health issues. They're often called mental health courts. There's no statute authorizing them or funding them, so they're all operating on sort of like a patchwork ad hoc basis, and only available really in limited geographic regions. Accessibility to even those that do exist vary widely, leaving many people who do have a mental health crisis to languish in jails and prisons. So part of the problem that we see this campaign as addressing is that in the absence of the statewide guidance over the last 2 decades, our treatment court landscape has grown into this sprawling, complex patchwork network that is as inefficient as it is under-inclusive. And we really see this very poignantly in our own borough in Manhattan. And I want to say that really part of this is a testament and a reflection of the resourcefulness and the collaborative spirit of all the stakeholders in Manhattan. So before we, criticize it's right, like what the landscape looks like, I do want to give a lot of credit to all of the judges and the DA's office and all of the public defenders, and then of course the treatment providers and the people who run these programs, the case managers and the peers, who all have come together without any statutory guidance and with very little funding also, and have pieced together these pilot programs. But now we are at a point where this is the landscape. These are all of the different options for diversion in Manhattan, and none of these are really addressing the scale of the problem of the way that we criminalize mental illness. And they're also overlapping in many ways and leave a lot of ways for people to fall through the cracks. So this is I won't go through this because we don't have that much time, but just to say that because of these really amazing efforts from the local stakeholders, we have created this sort of patchwork network, but this is insanity. And it takes like a very specialized expert to help anybody navigate this. Even like regular trial public defenders don't understand how all of these processes work. So the question that we get most often is there aren't enough resources in the community to really scale this up. We provide, so this legislation provides the legal mechanism to get services, but the question remains like, where will the services come from? So the first answer is that we are asking, our bill is not like it has a fiscal impact. So we are asking for a budget appropriation with this bill. And we have the numbers here, but for court operations, we estimate that the full implementation, the full rollout will be about 51.4 million. And then treatment providers. So if we're just modeling it after what it costs to get the drug law reform up and running and adjusting for inflation, we believe it'll be about $75 million statewide. But that's obviously going to just get us started. Our behavioral health system has been underfunded for so long that it's going to take a lot to get to fully invest in these programs. In the meantime, we have incorporated a prong of the admissions process that will allow judges to consider the availability of resources when they're making admissions decisions. So they could theoretically say, listen, this is like, we have wait lists of 6 months right now. There's no community-based treatment option available. You have a very high needs, very niche disorder that we can't treat. Sorry, we have to reject you on that basis. But we would require in those instances that the courts thoroughly report on them. And so every year we'll at least have a very accurate report of the gaps in the services in each county. Also, we expect that there will be a lot of cost savings, both from reduced incarceration and reduced recidivism and the collateral savings, and also the just the streamlining savings. Like right now, we are duplicating untold resources, even just in our own borough, and all the different assessments and resources that are expended in these various courts. And just in the efficiency of like having a case manager help someone navigate this like very complicated landscape of behavioral health. And ultimately, we had an independent analysis about the fiscal impact, and they estimate that within 5 years, it will be saving around almost $1 billion in state prison costs and also almost $1 billion in local city jail costs. Okay, so this is where our campaign stands. We made a lot of amendments in 2025 this year to address feedback from stakeholders from all across the spectrum. We especially worked very closely with the judiciary, the judges, and addressed a lot of their concerns. We're continuing to fine-tune our legislation through conversations with stakeholders. Right now, we're really focused on implementation and making sure that we're not causing any unintended consequences. We had a Senate hearing earlier this fall and had it was a showcase of a breadth of support from many different parties, the DCJS, which is the Division of Criminal Justice Services, the Office of Mental Health, OASIS, which is the statewide agency that oversees substance use disorder services, et cetera, and of course the judges, the judiciary. So we are marching onward. In 2026, we will be trying to get this legislation passed. We're going to start with an advocacy day, and I'll pass it to Rebecca Cortez to close us out on this. This is our last slide.
Hi again, everyone. Yeah, so I'm just gonna close this out, but I do want to give a little bit of just a quick explanation of what an advocacy day is for those who don't know. So it's essentially a dedicated event where individuals and groups meet with legislators and their staff to lobby for a specific policy. And obviously for us, this is the Treatment Court Expansion Act. So on January 20th of next year, we will be uniting in Albany to advocate for TCEA, and we welcome anyone to come and join us. We provide a bus service to Albany if you RSVP via the QR code on the screen. You'll also be put in small groups with individuals in our coalition who have been to Albany multiple times, who know how everything works. So also don't worry if you don't know much about how advocacy days work, you don't have to be experienced to come and join us. Additionally, please feel free to just visit our website, and if you scroll down, there will be a place for you to just get more information about our campaign and join coalition meetings if that's something you're interested in. We also have a social media account and Instagram that's on the screen as well, so feel free to follow that. And again, we just want to thank CB6 so much for hosting us. We hope that this presentation was insightful. We hope to see you at maybe an advocacy day or a coalition meeting, and thank you guys so much again.
Okay, that's it. I'm so sorry for all the people who are presenting after us because I do know we went over time.
Okay, thank you, Becca and then Casey. And then Casey, also, by the way, this is CB3. So this is so where we cover Chinatown, Lower East Side and, the East Village. So, you know, you did mention that a lot of your clients are from Lower Manhattan. So right now I'll take, questions, first from people in the room. I will start with committee members and then go on to others who are sitting around the room in the audience. After that, I'll take people from the Zoom. So what you should do is you should raise your hand and I will call upon you. Taisha.
Hello, can you hear me? It was a great presentation. I think it's a great thing for people to understand the difference between what's going on with mental health and drug addiction, and substance abuse, and how it links to prison and jail time, and how it's because they're not getting the services they get. One of my questions for you was, I know you mentioned how there's a little bit of a struggle, or maybe I misunderstood, when it comes to certain diagnoses for mental health clients. Is it because they don't know how to treat it when they go into the system, or do you don't have the services for them?
That's a good question. I mean, I think for decades we've really over-relied on our jails and prisons to be our de facto psychiatric centers, and it's taken us, we're coming to a reckoning point, and so, you know, we saw this reckoning happen with with the drug laws, in like, well, I guess in 2009 when they passed drug law reform. And I think we're seeing it now happening with mental health, and we're seeing it playing out in the streets. We're realizing everyone has finally woken up to the fact that jail and incarceration exacerbates someone's behavioral health concerns. If it's substance use disorder, incarceration could be deadly. And if it's a mental health issue, then it can be also equally destabilizing and traumatizing to be incarcerated. And so, yeah, for a long time, it just was, people were just funneled into our jails and prisons. And I think we're finally at a point where people are realizing that that is counterproductive. And if your goal is community safety, then it's also very harmful.
Thank you for that. I think one other question I want to ask was, when you have the clients that do have like the mental health issues, and there are some, depending on what their diagnosis is, like when it comes to schizophrenia or schizotypal issues, they are very, depending on the person, they're adamant of not taking their medicines. And I think a lot of people don't understand that part, that it's hard to get someone who's over a certain age to make them take medicine. I think having that kind of educational work will help. Speaking from a person who does mental health counseling for people. Because there's a lot of people that are on the streets and people assume because they're talking to themselves, they're not understanding that they don't know how to de-escalate the situation to not make it more aggressive, because they feel like you're being more aggressive than what they appear to be. So I guess what I want to say, I want to commend the work that you're doing. It will help a lot in all neighborhoods, so hopefully people will understand and try to see like they're human besides their mental health diagnosis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arnett. Arnett and then Susan.
Hello, good evening. I have a question with the bill. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Too close to me. With the bill, the bill, is concentrated on the drug court, or is it concentrated on, or does it have a section to deal with those that have developed mental, health issues while incarcerated? Because as I'm listening, I'm thinking about Khalif Brower and that situation in which he was in confined and it became, mental health became an issue after his incarceration. Does this bill address both issues, or is that just a caveat in which you're mentioning because things happen in the justice system? Because I was trying to figure out exactly where the bill is targeted to help.
That's a good question. So the eligibility criteria would be that you have what we call a qualifying diagnosis, which is a definition that we've, gone back and forth with, we've done a lot of research on, but ultimately where we settled is that it's basically tracks the definition of serious mental illness, which is a clinical designation, which means that it's a mental health diagnosis that has led to like severe functional impairment in your daily life. Or a substance use disorder. So either a serious mental illness or a substance use disorder, or any a neurocognitive disorder, developmental disability, intellectual disability would also be included in this definition. Okay, so you have a qualifying diagnosis that has contributed to your current or future criminal legal system involvement as the standard. And so we're really trying to get that at that nexus between the reason that you have found yourself in this situation is because of an untreated, or poorly treated or undiagnosed mental health or substance use disorder. And then your question about whether or not we're focusing on drug courts. So what we're actually doing is we're using the statute and the infrastructure that created drug courts, and just going back in and editing and really overhauling the statute so that we're not reinventing the wheel. And again, we're taking advantage of the fact that there are already courtrooms and designated judges and staff in every single county because of the drug courts. And so we would just want to retrain everyone so that it's not siloed anymore between drug courts, mental health courts, because in so many cases it's both. And so that it would just be treated holistically.
All right, thank you. So I think this is an earth-shaking issue for us, because, so I get the complaints in the office, and, we have a tremendous number of people who have mental health problems or drug problems and or both. We have actually really great outreach teams. However, generally the first service anyone will accept is a bed. They're not gonna, most people won't accept referrals for treatment until they're in a situation where, or they have a stable living situation. And there are a lot of crimes, there are a lot of complaints because of crimes. However, we do not we're in a situation where we can't encourage the police to, arrest people because we don't want people with these problems in Rikers. And even when this has happened, when there's been violence, I've been told where we try to proactively get like the DA's office or someone to make sure that services will be provided. We're told that unless someone pleads guilty, they can't ask for services because otherwise it's their lawyer's job to try and get them out, not to get services. So I think this whole thing is very confusing, and many layered and very necessary. And I don't know how it really is going to work.
Yeah, actually, so you've hit on one of a big point in our campaign is to try to not require a person to have to plead guilty to get into these programs, because we see this as a huge barrier and also a waste of resources, and a deterrent. You know, it's a huge deterrent because I'm speaking as just like a former public defender. I would never allow my client to plead guilty until I had turned over every stone in that case to make sure that like there was no defect in, you know, the pleadings or in the, you know, in the police interaction. Like, you know, I mean, that's just my Sixth Amendment responsibility. That's what I'm hired to do. And that's what everybody who's charged with a crime deserves. But then that means that you're wasting a lot of time litigating a case that is, and missing the whole point. And missing a really critical intervention opportunity. Because like you said, when somebody is arrested, it's oftentimes like they're in crisis. They're arrested because they're in crisis, and this is a very low moment for them. And it's an opportunity for where everyone should be wrapping around and rallying and trying to figure out a holistic way to steer them back into rehabilitation and to health. And so, yeah, a big part of our bill is we want, at least for the lower level felonies and for the misdemeanors, to dispense with the requirement that the person has to plead guilty and just go straight from arraignment into these courts.
Okay, that's, Carmen? Okay.
Hi, good evening. I'm glad that at least, you know, there's some kind of legislation to at least try to address this. I know it's not even a Band-Aid at this point. Because we've seen, at least, especially down here, the amount of, when someone's in crisis and it gets violent. And then there's no way to really try to mitigate that, and incarcerating them absolutely does nothing. For this person, and then we've seen, at least in New York State, facilities that would have been open to at least try to help people are not open anymore. So is there something or somewhere that we can just begin to address, you know, properly treating someone in a facility, not a jail, but in a facility that can try to help them with their particular issues, and that's like the higher echelon of certain mental illnesses like paranoid schizophrenia and so on.
I'm so sorry. I missed part of your presentation because there was an interloper that joined me. Are you part of your question? Could you say your question again?
Sure. In a nutshell, basically, will there be an opportunity, whether it be legislatively or we're addressing this Albany, some sort of reopening of treatment centers? Not the loony bins that we heard of
I see.
before, but I mean real centers that can begin to address the issues, particularly because I believe it was yesterday, there was a gentleman that was arrested. They just came up to an NYU student.
Oh,
and
yes, I saw that, yeah.
and,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay, I understand your question. Well, okay, so that is a complicated question because when they deinstitutionalized the psychiatric centers in, I think it was the 70s, that was a federal order. So, it was really about like Medicaid reimbursements and Medicare reimbursements, and the federal government saying, we're not going to reimburse for any of, you know, this kind of care. And I think that they capped the number of residential beds at 16. And so that is sort of why it's so, these like big psychiatric centers just don't exist anymore. And there are smaller residential facilities that have gotten around it, but yeah, I mean, it is really difficult to get residential or inpatient treatment for people who have serious mental health, even those who want it. You know, of course, there's a lot of concerns about involuntary commitment and like, you know, people being forced against their will to be in these institutions. And that is a separate question. But even for people who do want to be in a residential sort of like really highly intensive setting, it is really difficult for them to find placement. And it's also very difficult to find residential facilities that offer both drug and mental health. That's all right.
Barnett?
So, but anyway, just to say that our legislation doesn't address the legal barriers to that, but we do, a lot of these courts will require just the highest level of outpatient care. So when Rebecca was talking about forensic act teams or FACT teams, that's literally a team of people that come and visit you on a weekly, sometimes like 4 times a week. They come to your house and come to, it's almost like house call. And then, you know, in addition, when you pair that with supportive housing, where you're like living in a place where there are on-site services, that comes very close.
Thank you. Can I see that? No, I spoke with you. Sure.
Exactly.
We could just say your name, we can answer your question.
Yeah, got it. Also, many of you don't know me either. I'm Lucia, and I work for Connect, which is a like program that's essentially between ACT or FACT that you guys are talking about and traditional outpatient care. I work for Hamilton Madison House specifically, but my question is regards to something that we're experiencing already is it's difficult to hire social workers. There's like a limit of mental health counselors. There's only people who are able to do this kind of work, and there are like city scholarship programs. And I'm somebody who's like planning to go down that path after I do my time doing the community organizing stuff. I want to be a therapist, but what is the plan if there's like, I mean, almost $200 million being invested into this house, that going to like, is there an education aspect of that? Because I can imagine there being difficulty finding people who are trained to give the services that are required. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. We have thought about workforce development a lot. And we're not the only ones. I mean, this is like, especially the social workforce crisis has been, I think the governor has talked about it in every single state of the state that she's had as governor. It's a massive nationwide issue. So the short answer is no, our legislation does not directly create any new pipeline to licensing or education for social workers, but they are very much a core part of the community-based resources that we need. All we can say is that we're asking for more funding to provide, to give to these programs like Connect. And by the way, Connect just signed on to our campaign and we met with your people a few weeks ago. And also we have this, you know, until the services are fully reconstituted, all we can do is do the best we can with reporting and identifying the gaps and getting a more tangible sense of where the service gaps are. And the peers are also, we think, will help provide some relief. The peers have become very popular, like sometimes they're called court navigators. But these are people with lived experience, either having lived through, survived, and recovered from mental illness or substance use disorder, or just the criminal legal system. And we have started rolling those out into these treatment courts in the last year or so, and they've been really revolutionary, really incredible.
Okay, thank you. Did you say you had a question?
Yeah.
Jill, I'm up to the mic, say your name and your question.
Hi, my name is Nima. I'm just a community member. So I'm a genealogist and evaluator, and I've worked in like in the criminal legal system and community-based court classes, and especially when thinking about MICA, I was wondering if your legislation considers things around gender bias. So when we think about qualifiers, women get different diagnoses than men do. And that is not often taken into consideration for diagnoses for qualifiers, and it takes them longer to get certain diagnoses. But also things like domestic violence is often not considered a huge qualifier for mental health and as not a modifier for treatment, alternative sanctions, or length of their sentence and things like that. So does this legislation take anything like that into account for resourcing and things like that?
So there is a huge gender bias in behavioral health. There's also a huge racial bias in behavioral health. We don't directly deal with it in the legislation. It's something that we've discussed a lot within the coalition and among our sponsors. And it's very hard to write something like that beyond, okay, so here are the ways that we've addressed it. Requiring training of judges on these issues every year. And then the second way is to allow the applicant to get a second opinion if they feel that their clinical evaluation is inaccurate. They will have to pay for it, but as long as, they're being represented by a public defender, the public defender's office, we feel like we do this all the time. We hire experts to evaluate our clients. So, but yeah, I hear you. That is a real issue. And it's a cultural competency issue. And you know what? It's a workforce issue too. I mean, going back to the social worker from Connect who mentioned earlier that it was really difficult to recruit social workers. It's really difficult to recruit social workers who have that sensitivity and cultural competency. And then your second question was about, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what.
Just resourcing, if they think about resourcing.
It's about resourcing, so, okay, so before you answer that, I just wanna let everybody know we're gonna wrap up on this, so if you could answer her question about resourcing. We'll finish up and then we'll move on to the next. Thank you.
So yeah, with the resourcing, so our campaign is asking for a fiscal note, meaning like we don't want this passed on its own. We want it passed with funding. And so that will hopefully give some relief to the organizations that are gonna get there will have received these new participants. And I also will note, I didn't have time to go into this to the presentation, but statewide and citywide, there has been in the last 3 years a huge, massive investment in mental health that we're hoping we'll start to see in starting soon.
There's one hour online, so I along with the top.
Okay, so thank you very much. We did have one person online who had their hand raised for quite some time, so that will be our last question.
Okay.
I can't see what your name is, but you will be promoted.
No, he can speak.
Oh, he can speak?
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, Adam, yes.
Yes. Hi, my name's Adam. Well, I wanted to commend you on this work. I think it's really important. And I also see this pretty often. I'm a psychiatry resident doctor and I've worked at Kirby Forensic Hospital and just in the inpatient units. And I will see folks who are stuck in the prison circuit and, stuck in this kind of endless cycle. It feels pretty frustrating at times to be confronted with that and kind of think short term instead of long term, like this bill will hopefully address. But another big problem that I noticed was the backlog of, while working at Kirby, was the backlog of competency to stand trial evaluations and treatments. And, instead of helping people, they would wait months to be evaluated and treated. To my understanding, this bill is essentially like allowing for a safety valve and will let folks seek out patient treatment through these treatment courts instead of waiting in jail.
Yeah, procedurally, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but we believe that it will, and we are very aware of the 7:30 backlog. We should connect. Yeah, this is something that we work on a lot, and actually our office has just taken to just litigate. We're just basically suing OMH for not moving people because people are waiting 3 to 6 months right now after they've been found incompetent, waiting at Rikers Island, being deadlocked, as we're
Yep.
referring to, decompensating even further until they finally get admitted to a forensic hospital. But the worst part is that, and this is where I think we would enter the picture, when they are restored to competency, and they're brought back to the local jail, so to Rikers Island for New York City, then they just start the process all over again. Then they get deadlocked, they get re-traumatized, they don't get regular medication, they don't get any treatment. So that is where you're seeing the cycling, where like people are restored to competency, they're stabilized, and they brought back to Rikers, and then they decompensate within a month or two. And so we're hoping that that's when we could come in, if not sooner, and maybe I mean, if a person didn't have to plead guilty, we could probably just preempt the whole 7:30 process and just goes directly to these courts.
Yeah. Yeah, not very frustrating. That happened to one of my patients 3 or 4 times. We'd be restored to competency because he'd take, one antipsychotic medication and then he'd go back to Rikers, wait 3 months, not be given his meds, and then decompensate. Huge waste of time, money, and his life.
I don't think I can share my information, but we really should talk offline because this is like, we would love to hear your perspective. We hear it from CHS workers. We never really talk to the Kirby doctors.
Yeah, sure. I'll
So
try and find you.
thank you for what you do. It is a very hard job that you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you, thank you to the both of you for giving us this presentation and all this important information. And so we will move on to the next agenda item. The two of you are welcome to stay. Of course, you're also free to go. As you say, so we will move on to our next agenda item, which is number 2, which is the New York Immigration Coalition. So I'm going to get Dave, right?
Yes.
So Dave is gonna come up and speak. He has a slideshow. This is about our favorite topic, immigration enforcement. Not so favorite topic these days. So we're going to come up. We're gonna look for your slide and show it on the screen. And in the meantime, we'll wait for the slide.
Do I have to speak into a microphone for the Zoom or?
Here, if you want to bring
the chair up a little bit closer.
He says right here. Well, TV.
yeah. No, you're not home.
So, what is wrong? Are you starting to sit? I'm not signed in on the Zoom. I have the presentation on my signed in. So can you sign in? I hope so. What? Yeah, if you sign in, I'll make you a motion. Okay. Okay. Very well.
Probably wanted to go into Chrome.
No, go to the Manhattan Seekers website and sign out like a participant, right?
Yeah, to bring this in. Actually, that's what I did. And you sign in as co-host.
And you have to give the co-host permission.
No, you should.
You have to let her in first.
I think you're probably in.
Yeah.
Oh, you're already in?
Yeah, I'm standing up.
The wonders of Zoom never end.
They never do. I guess that's what I mean.
You see it? I'm in. Okay, for sure.
She could also send you stuff in, like, no, she's supposed to, right, right there. Then, there you go.
No, it's not ready.
should go in under your name. You should, there's too many, because it brings you in as a co-host, because it's an office computer. So you should go in under your email.
Okay.
While Arnett is looking for the link. So this will be about immigration enforcement, particularly, some legislation about the relationship between, state and local, police, with, federal immigration enforcement. Now, there's legislation for that, so. So that's what we're going to be discussing and talking about, and there will also be a resolution.
Is it still underneath?
And we will also be discussing, representation in immigration court.
Do you see me as on that or what, you know? It wasn't signed in yet. It must be still on to them.
Did you sign into my?
I went to my email and put,
Yes.
I'll go back.
So are you, have you joined?
She did join, because they give her this little prompt so she can share.
I don't see your name.
Oh, she just came out.
I'm gonna go back in.
I don't see your name.
I'm going through my email.
You missed Susan's desk. I think it's that, this big.
Going back in.
Did you see her?
I got Wi-Fi.
Oh, it's for some. Yeah, it's actually.
Oh, she got it. On the wall
Close questions or anything, that's your own, I think, between this and. So we're saying,
Makes sense.
there's your book.
So are you in?
You're on there.
Are you in?
No.
I see I'm on here, but I'm looking for me. Did I look through my email?
See if you could share screen, no,
I don't see.
because you're not.
Because you're not here as an attendee, so I don't, that's,
Oh, it says.
wait, maybe, no, you're not. You're not signed in as, are you signed in? I see Susan Stetzer. Could you, is that possible? Are you possibly signed in as me?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I'm looking for my email.
Well,
And
I was gonna say, if you do that again,
You can read the.
I'll next to my name, I'll just promote my name. Tell me when you're in. You go into Zoom and you're not. No, I don't know, how would you do that? I'm sorry, I meant to just, I'm sorry, just sign into Zoom.
I just clicked on the.
So click on it. I think it's Mitch. Okay, that's fine. Let me promote it. It's because it's the office computer. Okay, I'm gonna promote you. It won't let me do it. Oh, I know. I'm almost on this one.
Okay, I just promoted you to panelist.
Got it.
There, and now I made you a co-host. Oops, I made the wrong person co-host. Okay, you should be able to do everything.
Okay, I think I'm sharing now. Okay, is this like the right?
Yes, this is the correct.
Okay, so now I'm just letting.
I'm a host on this one, so I wouldn't let me promote her on any of the other ones because that's only on co-host.
Okay, slideshow.
Hey, from the beginning, right there on the left.
Is it right on the left?
Yes.
On the beginning. Thank you, thank you.
So, all right, worked out.
Can I wait for me there?
No, awesome. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the Manhattan Community Board 3 for inviting the NYC to talk today about some of the work that we're doing, but as well, of course, immigration is on everyone's mind across the country, here in the state and in the city, especially here in Lower Manhattan, for many reasons that we'll talk about as well. And I also would like to also thank the previous presenters as well for the important work that they're doing. And before I start today, just to introduce myself to folks online and as well to everyone here. I think this is on the green light.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So my name is Dave. I'm the Senior Manager of Immigrant Rights Policy at the New York Immigration Coalition. And so I manage and oversee our portfolio that deals with mass incarceration, deportation, and detention. So nothing going on there, right? And this portfolio also covers the federal, state, and city work that the NYC is engaged in. So I'm happy to chat about some of the different things that we're talking about, but most importantly, to talk about the 3 pieces of legislation that are pivotal and crucial to responding to the urgency of the moment that we're seeing. So first, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk to you about the reason for the campaigns that we have launched. It's no surprise that we're responding to the things that you're seeing, but these campaigns have been efforts that advocates across the state, across the city have been working on for several years now. Immigration and the challenges that immigration has presented, immigration enforcement in particular has presented, is not new, and many of us know this to be true. These challenges are not new, but we have seen an unprecedented level of harm, of family separation, of the list goes on and on. I can't describe some of the challenges that many advocates, service providers, and immigrants across the state and across the city have been dealing with in the recent federal attacks. So first, to start off, to do a little bit of level setting about what has been the state of immigration enforcement here in New York, and in New York City in particular. In New York City, I want to name that there are sanctuary laws that protect New York City that were passed by the New York City Council in 2017, as well as signed as executive orders by the mayoral administrations. And these sanctuary laws in New York City do prohibit collusion, or what I describe as collusion, which means when the federal immigration authorities work hand in hand with state and local law enforcement, so for example, the NYPD, in order to conduct civil immigration enforcement. So what that means is there is a law right now in New York City that protects immigrants in New York City from being harmed by that collusion, which means the NYPD can't work with the feds to conduct immigration enforcement. At least that's what the law is on the books right now in New York City. In practice, however, we know that that's not the case. There's been several investigations through FOIA findings by many legal service providers, as well as a department investigation report that came out 2 months ago, as well as another one that came out this recent month that finds time and time again there are several instances where NYPD has violated our city's sanctuary laws that are supposed to protect immigrants and all New Yorkers from collusion between federal authorities, and the NYPD, where they're not supposed to be playing that role. As then these sanctuary laws also protect people from the Department of Corrections as well and jails. And so you'll remember the whole Rikers fight that happened with Eric Adams as well, which I can speak more about if there's interest. But what's been happening now, right? So despite having sanctuary laws, we've had instances of violations of our existing law here in the city. And across the state, there is no statewide protection right now that prohibits collusion between the NYPD and other local and state law enforcement officers and the federal government from doing the immigration enforcement. And on top of that, 26 Federal Plaza has been the epicenter of immigration courthouse arrests for those of you that have been following that news. And what I mean by an immigration courthouse arrest is, 26 Federal Plaza is not too far from where we are right now. It's the site of where immigrants attend their immigration court hearings. So these are routine appointments and
And we're back. Now we're going to share.
May, can you want to explain to people what happened first?
Hi, everyone. So we are back now. Hi, everyone. So we are back now, and we will continue, our presentation about immigration.
Yeah, okay. Do you have to sign back on again?
Yeah,
Just wait 1 minute.
No, it's not. Do you have to sign on to her internet?
Oh, yes, probably will.
That's it's because you're not on her internet.
Yeah, it should show what's available, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Is that your
short iPhone. hope that I mean, it's just a regular hotspot, so I don't know what the quality will be like with multiple people, but. Let's see.
Okay.
That was me. But I didn't have to join on her internet.
You see me again, was you?
People are coming back.
Do you see me on here as you? Let me see what it is.
Okay, I see you. I'm gonna promote you.
Okay, so just wait 1 minute, we'll continue the presentation.
Okay, can you share screen now?
The host is allowed sharing this one.
I think you should click allow on the computer.
Okay. And
I don't know which one, excuse me, I'm the host on.
yeah.
Oh, you're good? Okay, good.
Okay, I'll get started.
Yes.
Okay, do you want me to restart or just keep going to where I left off?
Where we left off.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Sorry for the difficult.
No, we're sorry.
I'm sorry. Precise. But just to recap from the last point that I was making before, the recording that had been paused was to really say that, New York City and Lower Manhattan in particular has been an epicenter, not just for, New York, but for the country for immigration courthouse arrests and, the large majority of the most visible raids have been taking place here in Canal Street and some of the more surrounding areas in downtown Manhattan. And so far, I will talk about that large scale raid in a moment, but we know that immigrant communities across every single borough, Long Island, upstate New York, and beyond, from the northern country in Buffalo to the tips of Long Island, and all 5 boroughs across the state. New Yorkers, immigrant New Yorkers have been targeted, have had to live in fear, and have been caught in the dragnet of the Trump administration's mass deportation and detention agenda. And I'll talk specifically about the Canal Street raid that many of you were familiar with that took place on the 21st of October, where we had really one of the most visible large-scale raids that have taken place in New York City, especially in this recent iteration of raids that have been taking place across the country. We had over 50 federal agents from ICE, but also from other federal agencies such as HSI, ATS, CBP, the IRS, and you might be thinking the tax agency. And that's exactly what the Trump administration has been doing. It's been diverting all federal agencies that might not be doing things that are related to his agenda and diverting them to support with the federal immigration crackdown. So now you have IRS loaning agents to conduct the immigration raids as well. And so there were 50 agents here right down the street in Canal Street, military vehicles, heavy artillery, military grade weapons. And this led to racial profiling. They would stop anyone that looked like a street vendor. It led to indiscriminate arrests, and then it led to the eventual ICE detention of 9 West African street vendors. Sorry, if you go to that other side, no worries. But that's just a little bit to give you context as to the moment that we're in. You'll know, of course, there was another attempted raid that took place also in Canal Street that was thwarted by many New Yorkers that responded really quickly, but that had the beginnings of being another large-scale raid if New Yorkers didn't intervene and exercise their right to free speech and stand up to protect the neighbors in this neighborhood. It would have been another large-scale raid. And so This is on top of mind of many people, but especially right here, it hits the closest to home. And so the next question is, what are we doing about it? And so the first thing that I want to talk to you about is a legislation known as New York for All. So if you go to the next slide, please. As I outlined to you some of the challenges that we're facing with federal overreach here in New York City and in New York State, New York for All is legislation that the NYC has been championing alongside many partners, many advocates, unions, business leaders, restaurant workers, a broad coalition of folks across the state to really reject this idea that we need to create a culture of fear in our state and in our city. New York for All, essentially what the legislation does, and we'll dive into it a little bit deeper, is it ends collusion and prohibits collusion between state and local agencies and federal immigration enforcement across the state. It would codify this into the law. New York is behind. States like California, Illinois, New Jersey, Washington, Oregon, the list goes on and on, all have passed this common sense piece of legislation that just says the simple thing of, we don't want a single state or local resource to be contributing and participating in the mass deportation agenda that you're seeing right now, especially not when there's $170 billion of federal funding flowing into ICE, turning them to the largest interior law enforcement agency in the country. Especially when all this is happening, we want to make sure that New York State is not spending a single dollar participating in any of these activities. And so what New York for All does is it creates that basic anti-collusion principle across the state, reaching every corner of the state. Right now, we have what's known as a patchwork fix, right? We have maybe New York City, Rochester, different cities have been trying to protect its communities, but that patchwork approach creates so many gaps and also is incomprehensive, as you've seen when I talked about how the NYPD has already been violating sanctuary laws that we have. So the time to have a blanket protection that codifies across the state so that we're all in unison in saying that we reject any participation in this federal agenda is necessary, if not the most important thing that we need to focus on right now. And this also would regulate the sharing of sensitive information with immigration authorities. It would ensure that folks in custody are given notice of their rights, and it starts the process of limiting ICE from having access to state information databases, whether it's folks that rely on public benefits that receive public benefits here in New York State. You don't want any of that information flowing into the hands of federal authorities that are hoping to do civil enforcement. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't create safety. And I'll talk to you a little bit about a specific case. You can go to the next slide. Just to illustrate a little bit about what is happening right now without New York for All. Right now, we don't have that statewide protection that I told you about. And in the photo that you see here, I'm going to tell you a really quick story about Delmi Rendon and her husband and her two children. So Delmi is on her way to securing legal citizenship, a legal pathway in upstate New York. Her and her husband and her two children live in upstate New York. Delmi, back in January, was driving down a little bit of a rural road in upstate New York, and she accidentally hit a deer, and she had an emergency accident while she was driving on a normal day. The events that took place after Delmi decided to call to call 911 and to call emergency services, right, which is the thing you're supposed to do when an emergency happens, ended up landing Delmi into immigration custody, and then it landed Delmi onto a plane and in deportation pipeline all the way back to Guatemala, where she originally came from. And when that happened immediately, while that was happening, the same authorities that deported Delmi then went to find her husband while he was at work. And these are the local law enforcement, not ICE. The local law enforcement triggered this entire process. Delmi's husband was then targeted while he was at work. And as they were trying to detain him, Delmi's husband refused to go without his two children. So he didn't want to be taken into this dragnet. He said, "I'm not going anywhere without my two children." So then the local sheriff's authorities and the local law enforcement with ICE then went to the elementary school that both of the young girls are a part of, and detained them as well, and detained the whole family. That's just one small example of what's been happening without something like New York for All. You create an instance where public safety is no longer available, where you have a public trust in institutions, where you don't have safety with neighbors because you're afraid to call 911. If you were in an emergency and you saw and someone else looking at you while in an emergency, you would want that person to feel comfortable relying on the emergency services that are existing. But this is the reality of why someone would not want to call. Domestic violence victims have been afraid to call police services because of the risk of being fed into this pipeline. So that's why we need to absolutely ensure and codify into state law that we don't want a single instance where state and local law enforcement officers and agencies are participating and funneling folks into this federal agenda of mass deportation and senseless detention. Go to the next slide, please. So the New York For All Act is currently already introduced in the Codes Committee, both in the Senate and the Assembly. It is sponsored currently by Senator and the Assembly member. Sorry, my brain it's been a long day. I've been finding a lot of things. New York For All is sponsored by Senator Gennardis, State Senator Gennardis, in the Senate side, and on the Assembly side is sponsored by Assemblywoman Corinne Reyes. And so New York For All will put an end to the collusion that has existed across the state, like I told you. Local law enforcement, probation officers, and other state and local agencies, they routinely conspire with ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. And so we need to make sure that this collusion is stopped so that it doesn't lead to mass arrests and the challenges that I just described to you, which are a small example of what happened as you saw in Delmy's case. If you go to the next slide, please. And here's a little bit more of the individual items that New York For All does. And I won't go into all the details, but I wanted to show this to you to preface how comprehensive the legislation is into really making sure that not a single resource from state and local resources are used to participate in this agenda of deportation and detention. So New York For All would prohibit state and local officers from enforcing immigration law by the following ways: by prohibiting asking about immigration status unless it's required by other laws, prohibiting notifying ICE about the release of an individual if they're arrested, right? So once a person is arrested, ICE sometimes the tactic for law enforcement and collusion looks like this. The person is arrested and a local law enforcement officer might suspect they are violating immigration offense, as in being here, for example, maybe undocumented. They'll hold on to that person past the time they're supposed to actually be held, because typically people are supposed to be released if they're not being charged with a crime. They'll hold them longer so that ICE can come and pick them up and feed them into that pipeline. And so we want to make sure that we prohibit the transfer of custody to immigration enforcement, prohibit the sharing of sensitive information, prohibit the entry of immigration statuses into a database when it's not necessary, restricting the use of all local resources, prohibiting the use of CBP as interpreters as well. Sometimes the collusion happens when local law enforcement will pretend that they need help with interpretation and then invite ICE or CBP to do that interpretation, which then again ends up people into that pipeline. And then also requiring people to be notified about their rights when they're in ICE custody, because oftentimes they have no whereabouts about what their rights are in that process. And also prohibiting localities from entering into 287G agreements, which have been increasing across New York State. Really quickly, 287G agreements are formal agreements between local law enforcement agencies and federal authorities to say that your local beat cop, your local person that would pull you over if you're driving on the side of the road, that person can also be deputized as a federal immigration officer. So these are formal agreements that precincts can enter if you opting in to do that. But we have over 12 agreements like that across New York State, and they're growing every single day. So New York For All would terminate all of those agreements and prevent new ones from happening. You go to the next slide, please. So I hope I was able to underscore how important New York for All is in changing the entire landscape of safety and common sense here in New York State, especially here in New York City, to make sure that our immigrant neighbors aren't living in a culture of fear and that they can rely on the services and the benefits that they should have access to, just like all of our other neighbors, without worrying about being fed into a pipeline and a deportation agenda that they had no choice in being funneled into. And there are some action items specifically for this campaign. If you're interested in participating, you can reach out to Cassandra Bocanegra or Inia Soto to join the coalition as a organization, and you can also scan the QR code to, of course, sign the petition and let your legislator know that we need New York for All. I can also make sure to send this information to any email listserv that the community board has as needed. But this is a really important time, and it's on the top of everyone's mind, but we shouldn't let that be we should never assume that lawmakers will do stuff without us telling and demanding them to do so, right? Of course, the basics of advocacy. So that is a little bit about New York for All. And I'll talk to you now about, if you go to the next slide, please, about another campaign that is very related and is a part of this kind of new New York State that we want to build that protects our immigrant neighbors and makes sure that we have given them everything they need to feel like they're safe here in their homes, at work, on the street, so that they're not worrying about being kidnapped at any second without having their state and their city and their people behind them. So the Care for Immigrant Families is the second campaign that I want to talk to you about that deals with two pieces of legislation. So right now, as you know, you might think, and many people think that you have access to an attorney if you can't afford one. That's like the old adage that we've all heard. That only applies in criminal court. So I want to make that very clear. If you are facing immigration cases take place in civil court, you have no right to an attorney. And if you can't afford one, it's up to you to represent yourself in your proceeding. And I'll talk to you about a little bit about what that means and what that experience would be like. What the Access to Representation Act would do it would create that lifeline, guaranteed access to immigration counsel to change the possibility of your outcome when you are facing an immigration judge, as many thousands and thousands of New Yorkers are currently in the backlog waiting for their trial and waiting for their cases to be heard. And as of August 2025, we have 117,000 people that are left without access to representation in New York. And this is just folks that have current pending cases. So the number could even be higher. So the Access to Representation Act would, under a universal representation model, just like we have in the Public Defender's Office, it would introduce that model into immigration court to make sure that any New Yorker that's facing immigration proceedings won't have to worry about doing it on their own because the state would provide them a lawyer and a right to counsel. And so that's exactly what we're fighting for, to make sure that immigration legal services, which has become the new last line of defense, is one of the main things that we're fighting for, especially in this upcoming session, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about this too. If you could go to the next slide. So this image is from 26 Federal Plaza, that same place that I described to you. You may have seen images of it in the news. You may have seen images and videos of it across various platforms. These are masked federal agents in 26 Federal Plaza, waiting in the wings, waiting in the hallways to do that exact abduction that I told you about earlier, the immigration courthouse arrests. So if you are an immigrant that doesn't have an attorney provided to you, you are expected to go and appear and represent yourself in court. So it doesn't matter whether you have English proficiency, it doesn't matter your age. Children also have to represent themselves if they can't get an attorney for themselves. You walk into a room, into a hallway like this, confronted with masked agents And especially if you don't have an attorney, you are appearing for a mandatory hearing or a mandatory check-in, because if you don't go to the mandatory check-in, then you will come get you. So you have to appear for your hearing, and you're confronted with this. And then you are confronted with the reality of going into your immigration hearing, where the government appointed attorney from the Department of Homeland Security is there facing against you, highly trained government lawyer, and then it's just you there without an attorney. And that's the reality of what's happened. And on top of that, the Trump administration has been purging judges across the state, especially here in New York City. So now we have a reality, and he's been replacing them with government-appointed military judges. So the due process question is the main focus of this campaign. Is due process has been thrown out the window. And due process is under attack across the country, but it's under attack especially in the immigration courts, when you have a reality where the judges are being purged and replaced by government-appointed military lawyers, and you have a reality where people are forced to represent themselves regardless of age or language proficiency. Immigration legal services is the last line of defense. If you have an immigration attorney, your odds of having an affirmative or a favorable decision are 10.5 times higher of getting an affirmative decision. And already immigration law is one of the most complex areas of law, including tax law as well, right? It's one of the most complex areas of law. And imagine having to navigate that type of law on your own as an individual, especially if you have language challenges and proficiency challenges. So that's an underscore of how important building that access to representation really is. And if you go to the next campaign, the next slide, excuse me. You might have seen the story of these two individuals circulating in the news yesterday and today. This is Faye and Yuan Xin, 6 years old, Yuan Xin, and Faye, the father of Yuan Xin, had to appear for a routine ICE check-in appointment at 26 Federal Plaza. When Faye and Yuan Xin went to their routine appointment, they were then subsequently arrested, detained, and both Yuan Xin and Faye were arrested and detained. And then they were separated. And now the whereabouts of Yuan Xin are unknown, and the family is separated. The family has put out calls. We're kind of currently find where Yuan Xin is. We don't know about his whereabouts. We don't know about the conditions that he's been kept in. And he's 6 years old. 6 years old. And that's the reality of attorneys being that last line of defense that immigrants are really needing right now in this context of ongoing federal attacks. Next slide, please. So the two bills that are part of this campaign, the Care for Immigrant Families campaign, we're calling for the passage of the Access to Representation Act, which currently is being carried by Assembly and Senate both. So it's being carried by Senator Michael Gianaris on the Senate side, and it's being carried by Catalina Cruz in the Assembly side. And then the passage of the BUILD Act. So I think it was someone here that asked a question to the previous panel about the workforce of social workers, right? And how it's desperate, we need to make sure that there are enough people to do the work that we need to do. The BUILD Act does exactly that for immigration legal services. So I've outlined to you that there is a significant need for immigration legal services, but I also told you how complicated immigration legal work is. And so we need the BUILD Act, which would create a 4-year investment plan to have a pipeline to funnel more people into immigration legal services, so we can have more immigration legal professionals to do the work that is already overbearing many legal service providers across the city and across the state. You can ask anyone that you know. If you know any immigration lawyers right now, they will tell you themselves how up to the neck they are right now with responding to the demand right now. And it's only going to get worse from here. And so the BUILD Act, in conjunction with the ARA, would really create that ecosystem we need to A, have that right to counsel, and then B, make that pipeline so we're making sure that we have enough staff to respond to the needs that are growing every single day, and the staff are paid adequately, and also that the staff have the resources they need to respond to the complex needs of these cases. These are not one day cases. Cases can last up to 10 years, for example. And so we need to make sure that we build a sustainable pipeline for immigration legal services as we're creating the right to counsel. And so that's why we're presenting these two campaigns together as well. The Access Representation Act and the Build Act together. If you go to the next slide, please. And so this is our call to action for the CARE campaign. You can scan QR code as well, and you can also stay tuned for our mobilizations to Albany. We also have lobby days like you saw in the previous presentation, and we have petitions you can sign as well. You can go to the next slide, and I'll be sure again to share this with you. And you go to the next slide, please. So what can Community Board 3 do? First, you can demand that the New York City Council and the mayoral administration pass a resolution to call on the New York State Legislature and to call on Governor Kathy Hochul to pass and sign into law those 3 bills that I just spoke to you about: New York for All, the ARA, and the Build Act. Because we want to make sure that they're making a state that is safe for all New Yorkers, regardless of where you live. Also, you can organize and coordinate your other community boards across Lower Manhattan especially, but of course across the city, to mobilize their communities and elected officials to pressure city officials to demand that New York takes swift action, and also demand that your state representatives are signed on to the bills if they're not already, and to hound them until they do, because they need to be feeling the pressure up in Albany so they make the case that this is one of the most common sense things we can do, rather than sitting and watching and consuming all of these horrific stories. Lawmakers can take action and really protect our New Yorker and our immigrant communities. If you go to the next slide, please. And then I also want to note that, you know, everything I shared today is really difficult. It's hard. It's hard to understand what your rights are, what you can do. NYC has adequate and incredibly rich resources in several languages available on our website at nyc.org/KYR. But also, if you want to request materials as Community Board 3, you can put in a request and we can deliver materials to you. But you can also have we have printer-friendly materials that you can print on the spot right now. And these are some specific resources that I'll highlight to you that are all on our website that you can use, especially in the case of heightened ICE enforcement. It's important to have our Know Your Rights cards in your wallet to know what you should do if you interact with a federal agent, but also to know if you see someone else interacting with a federal agent, you can hand them quickly the card. So it's always important to have these types of things on you, and to also know what your rights are and how to support people and how to support folks to prepare their families for the event of deportation or detention in their family. So this is the new reality that we live in, and we want to make sure that New Yorkers are as protected as possible with these pieces of legislation. And we can do these small things every day and really tune in to make sure your immigrant neighbors are not being harmed without you turning away. And you can go to the next slide, please. So again, like I said, my name's Dave. My email is there if you have any follow-up questions. I'm happy to take questions now, but follow-up questions as well. And you can also email either Mario Brizzoni, who's our VP of all of immigration policy at NYC, as well as Vlad Flali, who is our senior policy strategist. And you can also ask me any questions as well. And those are our emails there. But with that, I will turn it back over to you. And thank you again so much for the invitation and I understand that these are really difficult things to hear and listen to, but I think it's important that we know what's going on and that we know how to respond because there are solutions for the things that we're seeing. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. So over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Okay, so it's 8:05, but I can take any questions that you have. But I did want to let you know that we have 2 resolutions to consider. One is to support the New York for All Act, and the other one is to support the Access to Representation and the Build Act. So do you have any questions or do you just wanna go into the resolutions and talk and view that and talk about that?
A vote, take a vote.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna look at the resolution before you take a vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
Sorry, that's a tough part I had.
I'm picking them up right now.
Yeah, so she.
Oh, if you want me to share, I'm.
Oh, I got that.
Yeah, so she started to share, and none of you have seen it before, because we just finished it, drafting it this afternoon at 3 o'clock. But, and Dave, you should look along with us to make sure that it is. Okay,
You should
I'm not
be
able to share it, we have some questions.
Yeah, I actually took myself out.
What?
I took myself out in Zoom, like the presentation was over, I said,
And she came out, so now she's back in.
I'm back in now, I need to be promoted again. So sorry.
Bye, see you. Stay in one place. Okay, you should be good.
Which one you wanna go for, that support? This is the for,
There you go.
and the first one for, access to representation. Where do you go? Okay, we mentioned for the one, at the show.
Should we read this out loud?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but it will be on the screen, sure. Yeah, you mean that one?
Yeah, that's right on. Oh, it's on,
You're still in it.
I know, but I was being.
So we're gonna share it on the screen and I will read out loud so you can read and listen.
Is it on your desktop?
Yeah, I'm really.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, you're still in it.
Oh, package,
There we go. Oh, you got yourself out of your, share?
No, not the.
Share.
The chat.
Don't show the one with trap sheet.
That's not her, that would be, Susan will have to change that.
That's what she gave me.
Yeah.
At least,
Oh, sure. Not sure. Oh, yeah, that's the one shows. It's on the view or something.
I do this sometimes, so we.
Yeah.
You good? If it's not sharing?
Yeah, I just want to turn off, because this is hard to read.
What?
We're gonna turn off we're gonna not show the trap sheet yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm not quite sure how to do that.
You can just copy highlight the whole thing and do it set.
Okay, so
Okay.
show me. I don't know, it should be a word.
So going.
I asked for assistance, I'm fine.
You what?
I asked for assistance, I'm fine, you can lay on me, it's okay.
It's still on there. There you go.
Thank you.
We're good.
It did most of it, so it'll be.
Okay. And.
Oh, 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 oh,
Okay, so the first one we're looking at is the Access to Representation and Build Act. So it's being shown on the screen, you can read it on the screen, and Carmen will read it out loud.
Support for Access to Representation Act and the Building Unrepresented Immigration and Legal Defense Act, so it's both. Whereas immigrants do not have a right to a government-paid attorney in immigration court, those who cannot afford to hire a private attorney must find a not-for-profit able to help or represent them. Local nonprofit organizations in Community District 3 who serve new immigrants report that immigrants now face many legal barriers and challenges. And more than ever, there is a need for immigration legal services and representation. In addition, lack of continued funding for immigration legal service providers makes it difficult to hire and retain staff. Whereas immigrants comprise more than a quarter of New York State's workforce, including 281,000 entrepreneurs, and over 1/3 of New York children have an immigrant parent, demonstrating the importance of supporting immigrant families and communities. And whereas applying for asylum in the United States is enshrined in federal law, asylum applications may end up in immigration courts. In recent years, the number of asylum applications filed in immigration courts have generally increased. At the end of the first quarter of fiscal year 2023, 749,133 asylum applications were pending in immigration courts. Whereas, as of October 2025, 1 in 3 people in New York who were facing immigration proceedings lacked legal representation, putting them at risk of detention in dangerous facilities, permanent family separation, and deportation to unsafe conditions. And whereas navigating the immigration system without counsel is nearly impossible, and legal assistance should not depend on the ability to pay for a lawyer. And whereas the Access to Representation Act establishes a right to universal representation, ensuring that anyone at risk of deportation cannot afford a lawyer will be provided with one. And whereas the Building Unrepresented Immigrant Legal Defense Act, or bill, provides funding and infrastructure for legal services providers to create, maintain, and expand programs that protect immigrant communities over the next 4 years, laying the groundwork for the ARA, and whereas providing access to attorneys for all immigrants in New York State facing deportation is both a moral imperative and a practical investment in long-term stability, fairness, racial equality, community safety, and economic prosperity. And whereas legal representation dramatically increases the likelihood of a successful outcome in immigration proceedings, with non-detained immigrants represented by lawyers winning at a rate of 60% versus 17% for those without legal assistance. And detained immigrants with lawyers being 10 times more likely to win their cases and 7 times more likely to be released from custody. And whereas long-term funding and investment in immigration and legal services, including $165 million in fiscal year 26, the Office of New Americans, $100 million, and the Department of Education Programs, $65 million, are essential to sustain existing services, expand access, and ensure organizations can hire and retain staff to meet growing needs, expand immigration law clinics at accredited New York law schools, student loan contributions for attorneys committed to pro bono work, program to support individuals seeking DOJ accreditation to represent immigrants at risk of deportation. Therefore, be it resolved, Community Board 3 supports the Access to Representation Act and the Building Unrepresented Immigrant Legal Defense Act, or BUILD, and urges the New York State Legislature and Governor to enact these bills to ensure universal legal representation for immigrants and provide long-term infrastructure and funding for legal service providers. Further resolved, Community Board 3 supports efforts to sustain and expand programs through the Office of New Americans and Department of Education to ensure that immigrant communities across New York State have access to legal representation, due process, and protections under the law. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Not a single question.
I'm down.
Oh, you didn't disrupt every day. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, actually, I did have a question, because I mean, I think that, you know, this, in order for us to do things later, we have to have a position that's voted on by the entire community board, which is 50 people, and it's not just us. So I know one of the things they ask is, about how things are paid for. So, and then there's another question, about, who has the right to free legal representation. I read in the bill that they would, people who are income qualified,
That's correct.
right, so. And then you have to figure out how they're income qualified, they must have documents. Would that be the case, they would show like, you know, proof of income?
So that's a good question. I think the implementation of that has been something that the Office of Native Americans is working on. So they have like guidelines for income qualification, of course, and they have flexible guidelines on how to have immigrants meet the need. But the Office of Native Americans would be handling the implementation of that. So we didn't necessarily write it up in the legislation itself, because we want the Office of Native Americans to have as much flexibility as they can to decide what is the most effective and safest way for income qualified people to prove their income qualities. So because what we put in the law, if we require, for example, that folks need to show XYZ document at the rate of the federal government currently, especially now, we don't know what documents and what type of databases will be secure in the context of immigrant safety. So we didn't build it into the legislation itself, but we allowed the Office of New Americans to be able to develop those guidelines. So that will be housed through the Office of New Americans.
Oh, okay, and then, so I think my other question was probably answered, because it says how much is 165 million.
So that was the one actually correction that I had. So because that was for FY26, we have a new figure that we're fighting for in the upcoming session, which is going to be $175 million, and it's all going to be going to the Office of New Americans, no longer with the Department of Education, because we're going to have the Office of New Americans work to figure out the best way to implement the same programs, for example, student loan repayments and things like that. We're thinking right now through the Higher Education Services Council, the HESC, which currently administers things like TAP. So it looks like it's a better fit, but the updated ask right now is $175 million, all through the Office of New Americans. And so I can get updated one pager for you if that's helpful. But just that was the one thing I noticed in that paragraph, is we have a new updated ask for the FY 27 year.
Okay, so we're gonna vote on this today, this committee, so should we change this right now to say that it's all going, that it's 175 million for ONA?
I think that that's the easiest way to fix that.
And then, but it's all those items.
Everything else is correct, exactly.
The office of the.
The substance isn't changed though.
Okay,
Yes, correct.
I have one question.
Okay, so I'm done with my question, and Sahisha has a question.
Yeah. My only question is if it's, I understand the income barriers for people who are over a certain age, but you showed pictures that are minors. How does that work for the children that are under a certain age that might not have an income and they're not with their parents? So how would they get legal representation?
That's a really good question. So there's also the unaccompanied minors program, that would usually catch folks that are in that specific system, but it's a bit technical in terms of, and it's not my area of expertise in terms of how minors receive services. I can also circle back if that's a special question that you'd like the answer to. But there is something known as the unaccompanied minors program, and there are services right now that would be fed into the overall ONA legal services system.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. So we're gonna look at the second one. When, I have, that's it.
That looks perfect, and then maybe FY 26, FY 27, that's perfect, yeah.
The FY 27?
Yes.
Yes, and that's the office of your American. And yeah, what's that? Excellent. Now.
Okay, so now we're going to look at the New York for All resolution.
Resolution support for the New York for All Act. Whereas many immigrant New Yorkers and families live with fear that interactions with government institutions such as police, traffic stops, attending school, going work, or seeking healthcare can place them at risk of being funneled into federal immigration custody. And whereas when local agencies participate in federal immigration enforcement, it can lead to unconstitutional racial profiling, misuse of local tax dollars, and harmful fear mongering that damages public safety and community well-being, reduce trust, and increase fear. Whereas when local officials do not participate in federal immigration enforcement, communities are safer because residents are more willing to call for help and trust their neighbors and institutions. Whereas New York City has been a sanctuary city since 1989 through multiple police laws and executive orders, and Community Board 3 supports preserving the sanctuary city regulation. Whereas Community Board 3 also supports a community education council. One, okay. Resolution to protect New York City public school students and schools from ICE and to maintain safe and supportive environments for all students, staff, and families. Whereas the New York for All Act would prohibit state and local officers from enforcing federal immigration laws, sharing information or resources with federal immigration authorities, and diverting state and local resources for federal immigration enforcement, except if there is a valid court order or federal judicial warrant. Prohibits ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and CBP, Customs and Border Protection, from entering non-public areas of state and local property without a judicial warrant. Limits access to state information databases and ensures that people in custody are informed of their rights before any ICE interview, and establishes consistent statewide protections. Includes police officers, peace officers, school resource officers, probation agencies or departments, state entities, state employees, municipal corporations, county correctional facilities, and, include, or, okay. I just, facilities include. Yeah, okay. Whereas New York for All Act responds to increased threats of mass deportations and heightened federal immigration enforcement, which have included raids, scare tactics, and actions that separate New York families, often aided by local law enforcement agencies. And whereas immigrant New Yorkers make up essential parts of the state's workforce, strengthen the economy, fill critical jobs including home health care, childcare, construction, and communities are stronger when immigrants can participate fully without fear. And whereas several states, including New Jersey, Washington, Illinois, and California, have already adopted statewide sanctuary policies. And New York needs consistent statewide protections so that immigrant residents across the state receive the same safeguards. And whereas immigrant communities deserve respect and a chance to pursue citizenship without fear, and many families who have already endured significant hardship would face catastrophic consequences if mass deportation efforts escalate. Therefore, Community Board 3 supports the New York for All Act and urges New York State legislation to ensure that state and local officers do not enforce federal immigration laws, do not participate in arrests or detention for immigrant purposes, and do not share information or resources with federal immigration authorities.
Are there any questions?
Any amendments?
There was something I was gonna ask you. There was something.
What the 8 judges that Trump just got rid of today?
To ask the committee, just to put more local information in here, the whole thing about the Canal Street rate. I had wanted to put something in there in the beginning, but I didn't know what to say. So they have this little thing in his slideshow, could we like lift it and, do you guys want to include that in the resolution about the Canal Street rate? And if so, could we lift that whole paragraph from your slideshow and throw it in there?
Please, it's all yours.
Okay. So it's about the Canal Street rate in October and the number of, there were like 50 officers from all these different agencies. to do this raid, and it was like, would you say it's the largest in New York City?
The-
In the city, in five boroughs?
Yeah, the most visible and largest raid so far.
And have it right here.
So it would be in the beginning and the, whereas's,
Oh, yeah.
what would that be? Oh, do you guys want that in the resolution?
I would say that, after you go for thousand. And that.
And make it very long.
Yeah,
Oh,
So
that,
it's longer, right?
No one's gonna make it.
or just make a mention of it.
It's up to you, we don't have to, but
If you could make a one or two sentences instead of making it a whole nother whereas, it might help.
Oh, in the raid section,
Yeah,
yeah. And referencing there.
there's also some verbiage in there that could be taken out.
What?
There's some verbiage in there that could be taken out. I didn't do it because Claire had done it, I didn't want to like split, yeah.
Section in here.
I mean, when you wanna keep people's attention, I mean, people know what's going on.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I like what Mary's saying, but I think the resolution speaks more to the actual legislation.
Okay.
And, but I,
I,
it's 8:30 and my mind is half gone.
Okay, that's fine, yeah, that's okay.
I-
No, I am just asking, because often we want to have like,
Yeah.
centered on how it affects us.
I
So
agree.
I put everything in there, but we don't have to, there's already a lot of information. Okay, so we will just, it sounds like we'll just leave it as it is then? Okay. So are we? No. So are we ready to vote on this?
Yes.
So we are voting on both resolutions at the same time, and so we're going to call the amendment. There'll be a roll call.
Maybe,
Yes.
Well. Yeah,
Yes.
Tanisha Field,
Yes.
Nine,
She's in the back. Langham's in the back.
names in that. I'll go back to, what's my phone say? Ramia, that's, these was Ramia, okay, Ramia. Ra.
Yes.
Thank you. And here, Robin, Alvarez, Andrade.
Yes.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Andrade, thank you. This is why I go to Texas Rural. It shows my weaknesses. Arnett, yes. Carmen, here, Alvarez,
As amended, yes.
thank you. And that's the end of the roll call.
Oh, can I go back?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay, voting.
Are we done?
But what night,
Another.
There's another girl, she said.
There's several more. agenda-
There's still more. We still have-
Okay, so we'll just wait for her
We
to
haven't
come
done a
back,
meeting.
okay, so we'll just wait for her to come
We're
back,
in
but,
presentation mode.
it has passed, and it will, so the next thing is that it will, go to the full board meeting, which is in this. It's on December Thursday, December 15 at 6:30 at +20. You're welcome to come if you wish, and then if it passes the full board, it'll become, our position, and then we can go out as well. So, thank you, and, so you're welcome to stay, or you can go if you like. Okay, so we're gonna go on to our next agenda item. which is the Data Collaborative. Okay, so, yeah, they're.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. All right.
Yeah, so you just introduce yourself and then start your presentation.
Sounds good. Can everybody see my screen? I'm just double checking.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Rainy Ropak. I'm a senior researcher at the Data Collaborative for Justice. We're a research shop at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and we conduct primarily quantitative analyses on the criminal justice system with a focus on New York. And today I'll present our latest study on the long-term impact of New York's bail reform on recidivism. Before I go into our hypotheses that we tested and our findings, I just want to point out the potential mechanisms that are behind our findings. And those are not mutually exclusive. There are countervailing forces here, but let me just introduce those real quick. So on the one hand, critics of bail reform were concerned that release under reform would lead to recidivism increases, which is on the one hand the necessary implication of no longer incapacitating people in jail. And on the other hand, there may also be a lack of a deterrent effect. So in other words, some people might be more likely to commit crimes if they think that they will not be held pre-trial either on bail or being remanded. On the other hand, however, the theory goes that release under reform may reduce recidivism rates, as it avoids the detrimental effects of pretrial detention once people are released. And we know from prior research that jail stays, even short ones, can have very detrimental effects due to job loss, disruption of family ties and social ties, housing issues, as well as the exacerbation of mental health issues while in jail, especially at a place like Rikers Island, which has particularly horrific conditions. And those two forces are not mutually exclusive. They can both apply. And as we'll see when go through our results, we see that for different subgroups of individuals, that might be a little different. So I'm going to address three broad research questions. The first research question asks, what was the overall recidivism impact of the elimination of bail and detention for most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies? The second research question asks, what was the overall impact of the reforms that reduced the use of bail in cases that were still legally eligible for it? And that is primarily violent felonies and so-called harm cases. That is basically individuals who are charged with a crime that involves the harm to a person or property, and where that individual has a pending open case that meets the same criterion. And finally, we also looked at the impacts of bail reform for different subgroups of individuals defined by their criminal history characteristics. The data that we use for this research comes from the Office of Court Administration. That's a non-public data set with court data. And that data set is more detailed than the publicly available data sets. So for example, we were able to track recidivism for any period that we really wanted. In our case, we chose a 50-month, so a 4-year and 2-month long-term period to really understand the long-term impacts on public safety. And what we did was to conduct a relevant comparison. So we focused on cases that were most directly affected by bail reform. That is, cases that would have likely faced bail or detention pre-reform, but who were actually released without bail post-reform. So our comparison group are people who were arraigned between July and October 2019 and who had bail set or were remanded. And our treatment group, our bail reform group, are statistically similar cases who were released under reform during the same time period in 2020. And those two groups were comparable on a number of baseline characteristics, including demographics, the arraignment month and the arraignment borough, case characteristics such as charges and criminal history, as well as individual characteristics. And we looked at multiple outcomes. We looked at any rearrest, so a rearrest that took place for any misdemeanor or felony. Then we looked at felony rearrest and violent felony rearrest. The unique features of the current study are that we look at the current version of bail reform rather than the initial version that was in effect during the first half of 2020. So since the mid-2020 amendments, that's really still kind of the current still the bail statute as it currently operates. There were subsequent amendments in 22 and 23. However, they had very little impact on judicial decision making. As I already mentioned, we looked at the long-term effects of reform over a 50-month follow-up period, which allowed us to track people until well after their case was disposed and they were released from pretrial detention, and in most cases also from post incarceration, which really then helps us considering the effects, the detrimental effects of pretrial detention that materialize once people are released. And we looked at two types of outcome measures. We looked at one, the rate of rearrest, that is the likelihood of being rearrested at least once during the tracking period. And then we also looked at the frequency of subsequent rearrests, which is an attempt to look at the issue through the lens of this repeat reoffending issue that's being brought up in the media and by lawmakers particularly on the conservative side, right? And this study has a statewide scope. We looked at both New York City and upstate New York. However, I will focus on New York City as it seems more relevant to everybody in the audience here. So let's address the findings for the first research question. What were the overall effects of the elimination of bail and detention? In New York City, we found actual reductions in rates of any rearrest, felony rearrest, and violent felony rearrest. We also found reductions in the number of rearrests across all those three outcome categories. Real quick, in the New York City suburbs and upstate regions, however, we did not find any effects in either direction. So recidivism rates overall remained unchanged outside of the city. Here's a graph that shows the results for New York City. On the left-hand side, we see the results for the rearrest rates. On the right-hand side, we see the results for the average number of rearrests. And the bars in green show the stats for the bail reform group, and the ones in gray are the comparison group. And as you can see across the board, all six outcomes categories, we see significantly lower recidivism for people who were released without bail compared to statistically similar people who were held or who had bail set or were remanded pre-reform. Let's address the second research question. What were the overall effects of the reduced use of bail in legally eligible cases? Here we also found reductions in rates of any rearrest and felony rearrest. Those were relatively modest, but still statistically significant. We did not find any changes in violent felony rearrest rates. However, we also did not find any changes in the number of subsequent arrests. Again, in the New York City suburbs and upstate regions, the results were essentially neutral. So again, no changes in recidivism outside of the city for those cases that were still eligible for bail, primarily violent felonies and those harm cases that I described earlier. Here again are the bar charts for New York City for bail eligible cases. And as you can see on the left-hand side, for any rearrest and felony rearrest rates, we see statistically significant reductions, signified by the stars on top of the bar charts. However, as I mentioned, we did not find changes in violent felony rearrest or the average number of rearrests for any of the three outcomes. So before I go to the next slide, those overall effects basically speak to the claim of a lot of critics of bail reform that it jeopardized public safety in New York. That is not supported by our data. By and large, we found no increases in recidivism across the entire state, and we in fact actually found decreases in recidivism in New York City. finally, the third research question, and those subgroup effects that we identified here are important for any future changes, potential changes in practice or perhaps policy. So what we did was we stratified our sample into quote unquote low risk subgroups and quote unquote high risk subgroups defined by people's criminal history characteristics. So we looked at low risk individuals who had either no recent prior arrests whatsoever in the last 2.5 years or no recent prior violent felony arrests. The high-risk subgroups are the inverse of that. So we looked at people who had at least one recent prior arrest in the last 2.5 years. And then we looked at an even higher risk subgroup, if you will, who of people who had a recent prior violent felony arrest. And as you can see here at the top, we see the results for bail ineligible people, and at the bottom of the table, we see the results for bail eligible people. And as you can see pretty quickly, by and large, we found recidivism reductions for low-risk individuals, those who have no significant recent criminal history, if they were released without bail. However, on the other hand, we found significant recidivism increases for those quote-unquote high-risk subgroups. And the most significant or the most pronounced, the most consistent recidivism increases for those who were released without bail were among those who had recent prior violent felony arrests. So in conclusion, on the one hand, as I already mentioned, bail reform did achieve its core goal of reducing the use of bail and pretrial detention while maintaining public safety. And on top of that, as I also already mentioned, not only did it maintain public safety in New York City, we actually found reductions in recidivism. That is, we found positive effects on public safety thanks to bail reform. However, that being said, even after the mid-2020 rollbacks, which reinstated bail eligibility for a large swath of cases, we still see significant rearrest increases for people with recent criminal histories. So that issue has not been resolved, even though the mid-2020 amendments took effect. And our prior studies that looked at the effects of initial bail reform basically found the same patterns. And then finally, as I also mentioned, we wanted to address the issue of repeat reoffending, which is brought up over and over again by critics of bail reform. And there is some evidence for that. So, for example, among bail eligible people in New York City, we found that while fewer people reoffended, or a smaller proportion of people reoffended at least once, repeat reoffending rose. So fewer people reoffended, but those who did reoffend during the tracking period did so more often. Likewise, we found the same pattern or a similar pattern for bail ineligible people who had recent prior arrests. Here we found no changes in recidivism rates, but we found that the number of offenses actually increased. So those are the 3 overall takeaways from our research, and I'll give it to the audience for a question and answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for the report? Susan, did you have a question? Yeah.
Thank you. So I just recently, I guess it was from your report, I recently heard about these statistics, particularly about, the lower recidivism, but higher with, those that had violent felonies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, well, 2 things. One is it doesn't seem to get through because the people who are, saying bail reform is causing a problem, there's a lot of very smart people who are saying this. I don't know if it's what is needed is more media attention or not, but I'm also wondering, since people pay most attention to violent crimes, and since there can be an increase in those who are committing violent crimes, is there any policy suggestions that if there are changes to the bail reform, that it be only to those where we see an increase in recidivism? Because
Yeah, that's a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm wondering if that would be sort of you know, getting people to like find some kind of common ground they can agree on and not ruin everything.
Yeah, no, that's a really excellent question. My perception is, and I've been researching this topic for a few years now, that you know, in the very beginning, starting in 2019, before bail reform even took effect, I feel like it was even more polarized of a debate. Opponents basically said the world is going to end or already has ended because of bail reform. It needs to be fully repealed, etc. Proponents of bail reform basically saw aggregate recidivism or no recidivism increases in the aggregate and called that a great success. And that was kind of a relatively basic debate several at the beginning of bail reform. What I've noticed in the last year or 2 years even is that both people on both sides have started to take somewhat more nuanced takes. This is not true across the board, of course, but you know, I've seen articles by conservative authors or authors who are opposed to bail reform who are now actually acknowledging, okay, overall we did not see a public safety decline, but then they really laser focus on those subgroups where we see increases in recidivism to make their political point. So I think we're not fully outside. We haven't fully left this sphere of where everyone has an agenda and they will cherry pick sometimes the results that support their agenda. But I like to think that, or my perception is that it has become a little more nuanced. Now to the policy question. That's a great question. I think, very broadly speaking, there are two approaches to address this increased recidivism among that relatively small group of high-risk individuals, right? One approach would be a very crude one, saying, okay, let's just go back to the old system, pre-bail reform, and allow bail and detention once again for those individuals, right? We know that it worked slightly better because it was actually in place in 2019. So that would be arguably that's the position a lot of conservatives or opponents of bail reform take. Let's go back to bail and detention. That's one possibility. The other possibility is to keep releasing even those high-risk individuals, but providing more intensive pretrial services that hopefully address those increased recidivism rates. And what I have in mind here specifically is pretrial supervision, right? So pre-bail reform, violent felony offenses were not eligible for pretrial supervision. It was either release on recognizance, that is basically without conditions, or bail and detention. But supervised release was not part of the statute, wasn't allowed. With bail reform, that became a possibility. And violent felony offenses receive more intensive pretrial supervision. But what we see in our results, it is clearly not enough to address the issue of increased recidivism. I think that's in part a funding issue, especially at the beginning of bail reform. Supervised release was underfunded, especially in the city. Upstate, for what it's worth, pretrial supervision is very poorly documented. It's unclear what the different jurisdictions actually do with those individuals when they provide these services. So I think we need to, I have my personal preferences. I'm not going to express them here, but those are basically the two broad options. We go back to the old system and start holding more people on bail and in jail again. Or we go forward with perhaps a more positive agenda and say, okay, we need to provide more intensive pretrial services to those people. And another thing I should add, pretrial supervision, the way it was designed, it was never designed to reduce recidivism or mitigate recidivism. The idea behind pretrial supervision was to ensure court appearance. That's literally the purpose it was designed for. And perhaps there should be more of a focus to also reduce recidivism, which is another statute issue perhaps, because as you all know, I assume, is that when judges make release decisions in New York, they must only consider return to court or flight risk, but they must not consider dangerousness or recidivism risk.
I'm gonna say, I think that's one of the problems, because the laws are made to ensure people coming back to court, but that's not what people in the community are concerned about.
Exactly.
In our community, There are, when you talk about services, you're talking about a lot of people who are living on the street, and it's, just not practical often for them to be getting services for one reason or another. I'm just gonna say, I think there has to be a sort of a pragmatic approach and somehow close the divide between the laws that are proposed for one thing and what people are really looking at and talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the fact that, for example, the fact that I was invited to this meeting as well shows that people are obviously concerned about public safety when it comes to pretrial release decisions. And New York is the only state where dangerousness considerations are not allowed, and that's obviously quite a mismatch between actually most people I talk to, maybe not at board meetings where people are arguably likely more informed than the average person, but most people I talk to who don't really pay tons of attention to criminal justice, they're quite shocked to learn that dangerousness is not allowed to be considered by New York judges. So I think, yeah, as you say, obviously people in the community have this concern, but that's currently not reflected in the law. And for what it's worth, this was also not reflected in the law pre-bail reform. Like even before bail reform took effect, dangerousness was not allowed to be considered by judges when they make pretrial release decisions.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Hi, thanks. I appreciate the data as a data nerd. One of the questions that I have for you is you said that there's a reduction in the number of cases and recidivism and like lots of great things, right? Down across the board. But as we know, we live in the real world, these things disproportionately benefit white people and less so brown and black people. And bail especially is affected brown and black people. Did you do any kind of data analysis on are there differential, even if it's not statistically significant, but did the rate actually affect the brown and black communities that are disproportionately affected by arrest and pre-trial? Because if we don't have that kind of evidence, then we are actually failing the communities that we have.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, so the current study that I presented today did not address racial disparities, but we have our research shop and other researchers have looked at the impact of bail reform on racial disparities, both in release rates as well as in the jail population. And the unfortunate fact is that disparities have not been reduced because of bail reform, right? So a lot more people were released thanks to bail reform, but it appears that those increased release rates affected all racial groups very similarly, which really resulted in essentially no change in racial disparities. So the gross racial disparities that we have seen pre-bail reform, where, as you know, black and brown people are incarcerated at much, much higher rates than white individuals, for example, we still see that to this day, 5 years after bail reform. And, I think in a way it shouldn't come as a huge surprise because there was nothing in the bail reform statute that really directly tried to address this problem. The idea was, okay, we're going to, if we release a lot more people and most people who are incarcerated are black and brown, just by absolute numbers, more black and brown people are going to be newly released thanks to bail reform than white individuals. But the disparities unfortunately remain. So that is one of the goals of bail reform that was clearly not achieved.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Susan, we have another question. Oh. Okay, I don't think there are any more questions, but thank you for the presentation. And, it was very informative, and the resulting questions and discussion was also enlightening.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for the interest. And if there's any questions that come up later, feel free to email me anytime. I'm happy to answer anything via email or maybe come back to another meeting sometime in the future. Whatever, whatever is needed on your end, I'm happy to provide.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we will, Yeah,
Yeah.
planning for term limits and procedures. I don't have anything particular. In mind to talk about, but I think, yes, that's on that agenda item, but I think, there's something you want to talk about.
Well, one of the things we've been talking about doing in the office is creating a section on our website for the committees, and then like maybe like a folder for each committee. And as you create your timelines, we could, post it there, so the committee can always refer to it as well as the public. And then you should probably also be thinking what you want to create, like procedures or documentation for when you look at the timeline, what needs like separate documentation. And you did start, a timeline last month, and I'm sure nobody's, it's kind of late, nobody wants to talk about it now. But if you want to forward what you talked about last month to the office, we can start, creating a space and posting and seeing how it all works out.
On the website, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I know one of the things, I don't know if this is of interest to everyone, and especially in this committee of, how do items get on the agenda? I mean, this is different from other committees, whereas you more like, the bar or set in a certain way, but in this committee, it's not set in a particular way. It's not like an SLA or transportation. Would you, is that one of the items we would want to like kind of document?
Yeah.
That would be great. Okay, so we'll work on that. And I don't have anything else. Okay. Let's, have our CEC reports. You go to Presbyterian?
No, not yet, right? I'm still waiting for Gouverneur Cab, brief. We were able to get 2 board members on, one of them is here with us, Deisha. She's actually the new Gouverneur Cab board member now, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, they come to find out they had an urgent care center, proposal at the ground floor that eventually got scrapped. This was during the time when I wasn't on the board there, and they said that now it's becoming a dialysis room for the patients there, but the other half is storage. And so the whole push now is, okay, let's reactivate that. That the board members are starting to form. There's also other NYCHA attending associates of presidents who are now board members. One that Jacob Reese is now a Gouverneur Cab member. There's increases in some flu rates this month, and actually this quarter, as to be expected. And it comes to no surprise to people, other people in this room who are in that field. And so not much that they reported after that, but that was a big deal. They need 22 members, of which right now at this point they're at about 15. So there's still space on Gouverneur Cab to be joined. So that is the latest Gouverneur.
Sexual health. They started a sexual health clinic for 18 and up.
One of the issues about the Gouverneur, well, I think maybe all HHC tabs, I'm not sure, is that there was this issue about, with the borough president and getting their okay mission. So we never really resolved it.
So maybe since we're getting a new borough president in a few weeks, maybe that's an issue to keep up with them. Okay. You have them find out, put it on the agenda.
Okay. So before the issue was that, we wanted to appoint, like, they said we could appoint, like, representatives to the Gouverneur Cab, but then the Gouverneur Cab told us that it had to be okayed by the borough president, the actual appointee had to be okayed by the borough president. And we were like, why do they have to okay it? So they're already on the community board, we didn't understand, so then we never added someone, but what Susan is saying that now that we'll be having a new borough president coming in January, we can revisit it with the borough president and see if that's really true.
And since he's a former community board chair, I think he'd probably be very supportive of saying the community board should be able to appoint their own appointees.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Okay, so that's it for that, right? No, we have no other meetings to report on?
We need to record that one vote. And then we move on.
Oh, Naima,
Yeah,
Yes.
I know.
so we voted on the immigration resolution, but you were not available at the time. Can you tell us? So she can record your vote.
Yeah, my vote is yes.
Thank you.
You're not able.
Okay, so the next meeting is, of our committee is January 8th. Everyone can write that, note that down. The first is New Year's Day, that's a Thursday, so the following Thursday is January 5th.
Borough. What's that?
No committee.
Oh, the committee meeting.
So the office is gonna be closed from like noon, Christmas Eve day until the Monday after,
New Year's.
after New Year's. So any agenda items we gotta do in the next week.
Christmas Day, is it Christmas Eve? Christmas Day.
It'll be closed until the Monday after New Year's.
Yes, I know that one of the agenda items will, be from back to Kansas, right?
Right.
Okay.
That's great.
All right, so we're going to vote to adjourn.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, on some old business, and I'll be brief, the Elizabeth Street Garden Apple decision, the 22 Suffolk Street, what is, how does that impact our lot again, that we're trying to consider? For school?
What, you wanna talk? We're not gonna get this full.
Yeah, we, at the last meeting, we discussed during when, Susan and Andrea had a meeting with the school's chancellor, so they had team members, but team members also from SCA. But one of the things they told us was that, the size of the lot is not, it doesn't fit the requirements for a school.
How big is the lot?
No, they don't have the money to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And they
No way.
and they
There's
still
no
don't
way
have the
they-
money to do it.
Yeah.
They still don't have the money to do it, it's still based on, that we don't have enough kids in the schools, it's still based on that, but on top of that, they're saying. I don't know why they're saying it now as opposed to before, or I don't know why nobody figured it out before, but that's what they said.
But they're also, right now, we need to give us dates. Right now, they just reached out again to us today to do a tour, but because of the meeting, I'm gonna say the meeting was so productive. Because we've talked a lot about how old our schools were, and some are over 100 years old, and that's why we need a new school. They countered with their other districts that also have even older schools, but they did say as a result that they are willing to look at our schools that are in the worst shape, and just today actually ask us to give dates so that we could do an actual walking tour of several schools that the Community Education Council also is lobbying for reconstruction. So we may get money put into fixing some of our schools because of all this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then is CB3's position on that lot gonna be replaced with maybe something else, a new position? Are
We don't need to take a new position for anything right now. I mean, why?
just to see if that's possible on the table, just so that's not lost to some other issues, or some other.
Like what? The only other thing that's been used for is housing, low income housing. And even though we asked to have the lot saved for a school, I mean, to be honest, if it's not a school, wouldn't we all want low income housing? So I don't think that's an issue. No one's coming, they don't need us to do any land use action for that.
The lot is owned by HPD.
It, well, it's owned by the developer now, it's under, or it's, no, I'm sorry, it's still under HPD jurisdiction. But I don't know, I'm not even sure of the structure with the developer. But it is still under HPD jurisdiction.
Thank you.
So the final thing? Okay, so we will have a vote to adjourn.
Wait, can I ask one, can I ask? Can I ask something?
No,
The first presentation we got about the, treatment court. Could we consider not tonight doing a resolution on that? Because particularly the item, I mean, this is something we've come up with every day in this community. You have people who are on our streets, are mentally ill, they're committing crimes, they're going to jail. And we have proactively tried to make sure they got some health services, but we can't do that because they have to plead guilty. And this legislation, that's one of the things this legislation would do, that would be to remove that. So could we consider putting it back on the agenda just to vote on a resolution to support it?
yeah, you want, January? Okay, so.
Yeah, we can revisit that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so we're asked, yeah, so today we just had an informational presentation, but we're talking about a resolution to support it. For January?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you can vote.
On that. Voting.
I'm trying to type that in, okay. I'll go back to it. No. Oh, pizza, I think I got everybody's name. I think I got it. Katie,
Yes.
Larry Flynn, absent, Eric Diaz,
Yes.
Tricia Field, present, Naima Fafani. I said it right? Yes. As long as it's five podcasts. Oh, shoot. Robbie, Hannah, the car, not here. Dragon, Alvarez. In Drive.
Yes.
I'm here. He's like, I'm fine. Arnett, yes. Carmen Perez. Blessing. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. You have my number?
Is that it? Can I end the meeting?
Yes. Oh, wait. Girls.